to Hope Dems podcast, the go-to source for fresh ideas and insights to making our great state of North Carolina and our great county of Hoke even better. Uh, Tonight, we're thrilled to have a special guest with us, Dr. Sarah Tabor, who's running for Commissioner of Agriculture. Dr. Tabor, it is great to have you here. I'm also joined, by our wonderful guest, my wonderful co-host, uh, Tyson Moy, who also serves as the Hope County Democratic Party's treasurer. Just always there. It's good to have you here, Tyson. How's it going?
Doing well. Good to be here with both of you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Dr. Tabor, it's great to have you here. Um,
Thanks so much for having me, you guys. It's appreciate it.
No doubt, no doubt, no doubt. We've created this platform to reach, the on-the-go voter, the voter who wants to form rational opinions, hear, what is going on in North Carolina and how this office has impact on their daily lives and things of that nature. And so um, we're going to start off. We'd love to, sort of to kick things off to get a sort of a vision of North Carolina's agricultural space or agriculture, and how would you make the state? Well, let me back up for our voters and for voters uh, who are old and some of our voters who are new. How does the Commissioner of Agriculture affect? How does their job affect their daily life?
Yeah, I've heard people describe Commissioner of Agriculture as the most important government job you've never heard of. It's it's a seat on the Council of State, so it's up there with governor, attorney general, folks who are in charge of the public school system, public instruction, commissioner of insurance, commissioner of agriculture is right up there on the Council of State, and it has tremendous control over our state's budget, our economy, and our environment. Right. So I think something that folks don't realize is you're supposed to have someone fighting for you in the food system. You're supposed to have someone protecting your soil and water, right? You're supposed to have, the farmers are supposed to have someone helping them grow responsible, healthy businesses that are going to sustain themselves. And you're supposed to have, all of us, somebody who's making sure that groceries stay on the shelves and stay affordable. We're supposed to have someone doing that in this state. And I think the reason that folks don't even realize that that's something that should be happening is because we've had a Republican in that seat for 20 years who has just been using that space to make sure that companies are comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So it's been so long since we've had someone doing that job, we don't realize it's a job that's supposed to happen. So that's Commissioner of Agriculture in a nutshell, and we'll get into it in depth. But yeah, that's the idea.
Oh, that's super helpful. I think that Tyson may have a question about the vision, your vision.
Well, so once you flip this seat blue for the first time in 20 years this November, it's January next year. You've taken your oath. You're Commissioner of Agriculture for our great state. Can you give us some insights in your vision for that? What are the things you would do? What are your proposals? What would you do to make North Carolina a better place to live?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a big job. So there's all kinds of things that need to happen, right? So one thing is, properly fund a lot of the jobs that haven't been getting funding. I think we've heard a lot about what's happening with our public schools. We're not paying teachers properly, so folks are not staying around to teach. So we're having bigger and bigger classrooms, right? Well, that's happening all over the government. That's happening in the Department of Agriculture. We're supposed to have folks helping farmers apply for grants, helping farmers apply for loans. Well, that's not happening, right? So the only folks who have the resources to really spend the time applying for a grant, who have the time to figure out maybe if it's your first time doing it, there's a learning curve. That means if there's nobody who's helping and teaching farmers figure out how to apply for grants, the only way to get money and loans and on all those programs, the only way to really invest in your business is if you already have the resources to hire someone to do that for you. So who does that restrict agriculture to, right? Think about it. So just like pillaging public schools is a really great way for private schools and other entrepreneurs to come in and kind of like take those public funds and put it to private purposes. Pillaging the Department of Agriculture is a fantastic way to make sure that nobody new can get into agriculture. and only the folks who are already quite wealthy can succeed. So something folks don't realize is agriculture. I think folks know that agriculture is a major industry in North Carolina. We're one of the most rural states in the country. It's a big part of our economy. I think what most folks in the state don't realize is our farm sector is in crisis. We are leading the nation in farmland loss to development. And it's because people aren't making enough money farming to stay in business, right? When you look at the numbers, the farmers in North Carolina are often making as little as half as much per acre as their peers in Georgia, Iowa, and Virginia. That's not because of agribusiness, because that's in all of those places, right? And it's not because of the soil or climate, because Georgia and Virginia share those with us, right? This is an us problem. And it's really hard for me to look at what's happened with our Department of Agriculture, where there's certain basic services that farmers are supposed to have and farmers in other states take for granted. And we don't have them here because we have not been funding it, just like our public schools. And that is having very real effects on our state. You give it 20 years, you have a farm system that's in crisis. So that's, again, first thing we do is make sure that those folks, make sure the state legislature understands how this is hurting our state's economy, right? Because farmers have conservative legislators. If we have a Republican who's in this position and we have a Republican-dominated state legislature, how come he can't get them to fund it? What's going on there, right? So I want to work with farmers to make sure the department that they depend on is getting funded properly, because they might not listen to me as a Democrat, but they'll listen to their farmer constituents, right? Because who's making sure they're getting into office, right? So
Sure.
That's number one. A lot of farmers, know how to paint a picture of what's going on with themselves, but they don't necessarily know how to translate that into action and how to get the state legislature to give them what they need. So that's step one, is just make sure that financial system is working properly and that employment system is working properly. Number two, obviously there's a lot of soil and water stuff that needs to get done. We have grants available for that. We need to make sure that those grants are going where they need to go. Grants are going to people in places that are using them effectively. There can be a potential in state governments for grant funds to go to folks who are well connected. We need them going to folks who are cleaning up a mess. It's that simple, right? So that's number two, is make sure that money's going where it needs to go. And number three, and this is a big one, is we really need to legalize cannabis in this state. That's not a radical proposal. It's already the law in 11 states, and medical is legal in the majority of US states. Does it cause an increase in crime? Enough states have tried it that we know this. What it does is it brings accountability and transparency to a big industry that's already in the state, that's already happening. And if we use a standard, 15% tax on cannabis products sold in the state, like most states do, that's $810 million. That's almost $1 billion worth of tax revenue. And my pitch to Republicans is, if we're not doing that, that's $810 million worth of stuff we have to tax everywhere else. We should do it. So those are my three things. Make sure the money's going where it needs to. Legalize it.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to bring that up a little later, the cannabis
People always
especially.
do. You just got to start out with it, yeah.
I mean, at some point, do you really want to be the last state to legalize cannabis and miss out on the opportunities? So I'm curious if you could speak to what would it look like from a practical position? Let's say the legislature finds, 3 ghosts visit them in the middle of the night, and they wake up the next morning and think, you know what, let's do it. What would that look like from a practical standpoint for farmers in the state?
Right. So a lot of different, as many states have legalized cannabis, that's how many ways there are to do it, right? So it depends quite a bit on how we do it, right? The how is just as important as the if we legalize, right? So what you don't want to have happen, and we've seen happen in multiple states, is the laws legalizing it are written under the influence of a few large companies, investor-backed companies that have really controlled the cannabis industry in a couple of different states. And what they often can do is make it so that it's one thing to have some basic regulations like we have in the alcohol and tobacco industry, where you don't sell to minors, you make sure you tax it properly. There's some basic regulations there in place. But what you'll find is some states put so many strictures on it because, again, a lot of folks are panicky about, if we legalize it, it'll just be in everything, Some folks get really panicky and kind of overcompensate. I think we want to remember that we are not creating a new industry. It's already here. It's a black market, and you want to bring it out into officialdom, which means you have to make it as easy as possible for folks to switch over, or they're going to keep selling illegally. We've seen this in some states that make it very difficult. So what you need to do is make those barriers to entry as low as possible. And again, it's kind of funny because you'll always hear Republicans saying, that too many regulations drive people out of business, they drive a black market. And yet, in a lot of Republican dominated state legislatures, that's exactly what they do when they're legalizing it, right? So they're missing out on state revenue. They're keeping that criminal element in the business. And the people who are able to make that transition to legal sales typically are larger companies that have an army of lawyers that can get them through all those hurdles. We have to be really careful about which hurdles are actually necessary, necessary regulations to maintain public safety versus ones that are just there to make a few people who like to clutch their pearls feel better. And actually what they do is create hurdles to a sustainable, sane business.
Wow, that is so incredibly helpful. Dr. Taylor, can you share with our listeners why cannabis, or the history behind why cannabis was criminalized in the first place? I think that's important context for so many of our listeners. I'd love for you to share that with them.
Sure, yeah. So in many cases in the US, we have a drug war mentality. And a lot of times, the headline reason that something was banned was public safety, but the real reason is a drug or substance got associated with a certain group of people. And we said, well, if we can just ban that substance, then we can nab all these people for any old reason, right? So, mind-altering substances that came over from Europe, like alcohol, are considered totally fine. We had a period when we tried to do a prohibition, and we know how well that worked, right? So we experimented with that, and then we realized, oh, this turns all this does. It doesn't make anybody stop drinking. It just turns everybody into lawbreakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when that was applied to folks who look like me, then officials realized it was a problem, right? But when it comes to folks who don't look like me, we've decided that making everybody into a criminal is still okay. And that's just not a sane way to run a country, that's just not helpful. And again, like I tell people, this is not creating a new market. This is just bringing transparency and accountability to a thing that is already happening, is already a big deal in our state, and we want it to function well. So, I mean, we could go way more into depth. That's the kind of long and short of it. I will say it's kind of funny to be commenting on cannabis legalization, like as myself, because I'm not a huge partaker, to be honest with you. Like I grew up in a very conservative religious background. It just, hasn't ever really been my thing.
Right.
I just want to legalize it from a standpoint of, I think it's a smart idea, I just think it's kind of silly to keep it banned. So, and as a crop scientist, I'm like, let's grow a plant. That's good. So it's as simple as
100%.
Yeah, as Richard Nixon said, you can't make being black or a hippie illegal, but you can make marijuana illegal, and you can use it to affect the same problem or affect the same change.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But call a spade. Like, it's a discriminatory policy. Like, that's what it does. So I mean,
Exactly.
$1 billion in tax revenue a year is great. People who want to use it, that's great. But there's so many benefits, and what's the downside? As you said, so many states have already legalized it, and they haven't turned into Mad Max or the end of days. So yeah, again, at what point are you the last state sitting there going, gosh golly gee, I don't know about this?
Yeah. And again, like, being myself, not being a huge partaker, just coming at it from a crop science and economics perspective. I think it's really important to kind of go, hey, just, like, I'm a suburban person who is not really into weed, and I think we should legalize it. And I think we should start saying that, like, we need normies to come out in favor of this.
I'm a church boy, grew up in the church, never used it, but it's hard for me to criminalize something, A, that grows out of the ground, and B, has no one's ever overdosed from, and has clear documented medicinal value. It's just insane. But then when you add in the racialized element to it, it's, we all know where that comes from. And I think that has to be spoken out loud, right? Because I think there are folk who have grown up in an era where folk who look like me, who grew up in an era where they do clutch their pearls when it comes to this topic, and it once you tell the story behind it, and then bring a bit of rationale, they themselves become supporters. My mother is one such is an example of that. Has come full circle on this, and totally is for legalization, and making it something that obviously we can profit from, and then obviously not be able to use as another tool to lock up brown and black folk for, so yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, this is amazing. We're talking about weed
Get right into it.
and yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. But yeah, I absolutely love this.
Mhm.
And while we're
Yeah.
talking, about race, uh, my dissertation was on the three North Carolinas, and particularly a focus on the Black Belt. And so I'm fascinated. When I was doing my research, it was fascinating to talk to Black farmers, who are oftentimes faced with the challenges of finding a cash crop that makes it worth their while to stay in business. Um, how would you as a commissioner prioritize or give uh, um, provide the resources and attention to support farmers, not just Black farmers, but farmers of color who have faced discrimination over history?
Yeah. Great question. So we alluded to one thing already, which is that we don't have programs that help people apply for grants, right? Most states take this for granted. So that is going to affect the most marginalized farmers the most, right? Because that's who's least likely to have staff, right? That's who's least likely to have a lot of experience, like maybe they're in university writing some grants. They're less likely to have that kind of experience. So that's who that impacts the most, right? Number two, so there's other sources of funding besides state grants. That's the big one we have now. There's also philanthropic funding. There's a ton of folks who have family offices who want to do charity and want to invest in sustainable agriculture. That money is going to preferentially tend to flow along their personal networks. If they have a niece or nephew or son or uncle who's doing a sustainable project, it's they're probably going to get funded just because they're family with folks who have a lot of money. They don't necessarily know or are ever going to encounter, minority farmers who are really out in the sticks, right? So that's something where a commissioner of agriculture can serve a really useful role of a connector, right? And saying, here are all these people we have in this state doing innovative stuff, who you would never meet, if you're like hanging out in swanky bars in New York City, right? You're never going to see them if that's what you're doing. But that's where the people who have the money are. And this is where the people who have the skills and the knowledge are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a role that Commissioner of Agriculture can play that's very important. It's just playing a connecting role, highlighting people, going around the state, finding folks who are doing innovative stuff. I've got a really amazing story of people just like that. I've been on, um, all over the state. There's all kinds of farmers doing really amazing stuff out here. There's one in particular that stands out. Um, they're Hmong immigrants, from Laos. They came over after the Vietnam War because the Hmong people allied with the United States, and then after the U.S.
Oh,
lost, they had to get out of Dodge. Yeah. So there's Hmong communities all over the United States. Uh, my family has moved all over the place because my dad's in the military, and so when we lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin, we had some Hmong neighbors, and there's there's actually a dairy farm behind us that couldn't stay in business, and so they rented it out to a Hmong lady, and she was growing vegetables and killing it. So Hmong
oh
communities all over
wow.
the yeah. Hmong communities all over the United States, they come from like just a traditional like backwoods peasant farming background, and so they kept that up as much as they could. But if you settled in, Los Angeles or Wisconsin, the traditional Hmong rice varieties were not thriving well there because
Right.
Hmong rice is it's from tropical mountains, right?
Uh-huh.
So there's a Hmong family that settled in Appalachia here in Western North Carolina, and guess what? Their rice loves it there. That
Really?
yeah, because it's basically the same environment that their rice is used to, right? And the way they're used to growing it, they knew how to do that, and it translated really well. And so the
That's
funniest thing to me
fascinating.
was, yeah, when you talk to, just like most farmers in Appalachia will tell you, oh, it's so hard out here, or it's so mountainous, our fields are really small. Well, that's the only thing Hmong farmers have ever known. They're like, looks normal to me, and they just go. Um, and so they're growing these little tiny rice fields out there. It's maybe like a quarter an acre up to maybe 3 acres. But because so many rice fields in Asia are so small, there's equipment that's sized properly for that. It's not like
Mhm.
wheat and soybeans where there's just giant combines, right? They have tiny little equipment, and it's cheap and it's affordable. So they're kind of low key becoming like tiny rice field. I don't want to say kingpins because they actually have a lot of trouble getting access to land, which is a big problem we can talk about. But they're growing their operation as much as they can. They did get a state grant to do that. And so I think that's a fantastic example of how much money can have a big impact on folks who already have those skills in place. Because I think most folks in the US would not look at the mountains of Appalachia and think, I know rice. But like, if you're Hmong, you know. And so it was,
You.
yeah. So that's a great example of a place where our state, like did come through for these folks and gave them a little
Right.
bit of a leg up. And there's still a lot more that needs to be done to let them like be what they could be. Um, but it's also a great example of what happens when you give people who don't look like, kind of your like bread and butter, kind of looks like me, plaid person,
Hmm.
we need to not be the only people in agriculture because we don't have the only good ideas.
Right. Yeah, we as a society benefit when the farmers of West Africa, the farmers of East Asia, and the farmers from Northern Europe all come together. We as humans, and of course, preserving the native traditions, we all benefit. I want to follow up that because I think that I appreciate this, and I want to name the fact that you're bringing innovation and you're bringing new thoughts and new new energy into this space. My I work in the renewable energy advocacy space, and so we believe that we're on the cusp, or if not on the cusp, already in a new energy transition period. The first one was moving from burning wood to burning coal, and then we moved from burning coal to hydrocarbons, oil and gas, and now that the Atlantic Ocean is staying above 80 degrees for 6 and 7 months out of the year, we should probably not do that anymore. That being said, we're rethinking how we power our homes and how we build the equipment to power our homes, how we design these things. And so my focus is less on traditional communities, traditional Carries, Raleighs, and Charlottes, but on Eastern North Carolina communities who could maybe pair affordable housing or new housing, because a lot of their housing stock is older. So maybe new housing with solar and other renewable, sustainable energy sources. How to pair those things with wraparound other options like community farming. So new communities that can support themselves and are much more sustainable. How do you feel? Do you see any opportunities, obviously coming from the historic funding through the Inflation Reduction Act? Do you see any ideas to sort of merge your innovative thinking around agriculture with the emerging opportunities?
Right. So there's a whole lot of different directions we could go with that, right? So I think one of the things that folks in North Carolina in the farm industry are really coming to grips with right now, and I've heard this over and over again when I'm talking to like small family farmers, the big corporate guys are saying we can't keep doing things the way we're doing them. Everyone is saying this, every size, right? Which is a really kind of weird moment in history. And it's a time when I heard somebody say once, never waste a good crisis. Like North Carolina agriculture really is in crisis. And that doesn't
Yeah,
mean it's all over. It means people are actually paying attention and thinking we have to do things differently. And
that's
as
right.
difficult as those times are, they are precious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a
Mm-hmm.
chance when everyone's actually paying attention, is actually interested in trying something new. And that's a very difficult thing to get people on board with. So we're at a very precious time right now when we have some chances to try things differently. I think we're finding that the pattern of, you grow up on a farm, you know, you the way family farms work, I don't think is how people not in agriculture think they work. Typically what happens is you might think you grow up on a farm, you come of age, you stay on the farm, you work on the farm, you grow there, you die. That is not how most family farms work.
Right.
Typically, the family farm's not making a lot of revenue, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
vast majority of family farmers have a day job. Their farm is more or less a side hustle, right? And so you
Mm.
grow up on a family farm, you come of age, you got to get your own job because that's what sustains the
Mhm,
family farm.
mhm.
If you want to stay on the farm, you still have to have a day job to support you there, right? Because the farm's not making a salary, right?
Right.
If it is making one, it's barely making enough to keep your parents on board, right? They don't need
Mm.
another adult mouth to feed. They got their free labor out of you when you're in your teens. It's time to go.
Sounded
Um,
good, right?
Yeah, and if you want to start your own family, you got to make your own, like, having a family income, right? So the vast majority of kids who grew up on farms have to leave. Like, they got to go to school, join the military, something like that, to launch their own life, right? It's not a thing where you can come of age and stay put. And it hasn't really been like that ever in US history. That's never really been how the family farm works. You grow up there, you come of age, you leave, and then if you inherit the farm, it's because you come back later when your parents are too old to take care of it anymore. That's when the transition happens. That's when a new farmer comes on board. And that, by the way, is why the average farmer is 55. It's not because they're all dying out. It's because you inherit the farm when you're 55, you're like 45, right? It's when your parents are too old to take care of the place is when you finally inherit the farm. So that's why the average age of farmers is quite elevated, I think, compared to what people might expect. And it's always going to stay that way to some extent, as long as we keep doing things this way. So, knowing that this is how it works, I think illuminates a lot of things about agriculture. When you hear folks say, well, kids these days don't want to farm. Well, we just talked about how there's no money there, right? If you want to make a living for yourself, you have to leave, right? That's part of why kids these days don't want to farm. The farms are
Right.
built in such a way that there's not a salary for them to work for, right?
Right.
But it's easier to blame the kids than it is to take responsibility for the kind of farm you built. It's a little verboten to say, but as someone whose job it has been for years to help farmers build a better business for themselves, because a lot of farmers, they see this coming and they said, I have to rebuild my farm business to make sure that my kids can stay. So I had to help my clients learn to do things that were not normal in agriculture. Like, making it so your kids can stay as adults is a weird thing to do in agriculture, and I help them do that, right? How to not just copy what their neighbors are doing, because what their neighbors are doing couldn't support kids, right? And then if you want your kids to come back, you finally got old enough that you can't take care of your farm anymore, and now you want your kids to come back. They're in their 40s, right? If you waited this long, they're in their 40s. They're
Mhm.
married. They got day jobs
Mhm.
in a different town.
Mhm.
They got kids in high
Mhm.
school, and you
Mhm.
want them to uproot their life, you know,
Mhm.
and to come take over your operation, which may not be doing well. They would need a day job there to support it. Well, those jobs may not exist in that town, right?
That's right.
And so the reality of all that is really starting to collide with folks in the farm sector. And I'm not just talking small family farms, the big boys, the good old boys are running smack into this problem as well. So when I say
Mm.
agriculture right now is in a crisis, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And it's a very difficult topic. We call it succession in the agriculture world, is like that moment when you pass it on to the next generation. It's succession. There can be drama. There's a whole TV show called Succession for a reason, when everybody's desires kind of collide with reality and everything. Um, and so it's just a very difficult topic, but that is the reality. Succession, the way we do agriculture, uh, it's not that kids these days don't want to farm anymore. It's that succession is hard. And if
Mhm.
you don't plan for it for your entire lifetime and game it out ahead of time, it's not going to work. If you just call up your kids one day and you're like, I broke my hip, come take the farm. Good luck to you, you know?
Right.
Um, and that's unfortunately the way, I don't want to say a lot of folks have planned it that way, but in order to plan succession out ahead of time, number one, you have to build a good business. But number two, you also have to live your life, from your 20s or 30s onwards as a farmer with an eye towards your own mortality. Like, you have to be planning for your death 30, 40 years ahead of time. Most people don't think like that,
Don't.
right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so a lot of the things that we're expecting a family farm to do in terms of like continuity across generations, and it's actually very much against human nature. And I don't think folks necessarily realize how uh, fragile and just not really not in fitting with human nature the concept of the family farm the way we're doing it right now is. And so I work with a lot of kids who grew up on farms who are like really heartached over the fact that they can't continue the tradition. And I'm like, okay, but look at the landscape you're playing with here, right? This isn't about you being chicken. Like, nobody can make this work, right? And working with a lot of farm parents who are kind of looking at succession coming at them and going, you better prepare now. What's that going to look like? It's time to stop playing. It's real talk right now. So that was a bit of a long digression, but you talked about new opportunities. Um, and I think it's really important to start with really understanding how what we have now works and the ways it doesn't work. And what do young people actually need to get into agriculture? Growing up on a farm is not enough. I think we can see that pretty plainly, right?
Right.
Um, so we need better on-ramps to agriculture. We can talk a little bit about what that looks like. I think I spend all the time talking about why the one thing doesn't work well. like what the flaws are here. Because I think the most important thing is not to blame young people for picking up the mantle like this, because it's not a good mantle. The system does not work. We need better on ramps.
Well, and to keep it sort of on some of the negative perspective. We love a little bit of negativity on the Hope Dems podcast. And I'm asking this not just because William took my positive question, but as we're entering into the climate crisis, again, I have to imagine farmers are seeing it, some of the most obvious effects of it. What Not so much on the positives, how we're going to fix it, but on the negatives, what are they seeing? What are they dealing with? What is the consequences of the climate crisis going to be for these farmers?
Yeah, so I'm going to be real with you for a second. Farmers don't want to talk about climate change, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like I've seen this with other groups of people too. Like with my city government here in Fayetteville, there was a time when it was not, you just don't talk about it. That's not a real, that's a thing hippies made up, until the day there was we had a hurricane that like squatted on town for 2 or 3 days, which is an unusual thing for a hurricane to do. Dumped tons of water. There was flooding everywhere. Dams broke. It was nuts. All of a sudden, climate change was real, but only as an excuse. Oh, those dams all broke because of climate change. That's why we need money. Oh, all these roads don't work because of climate change. It's not our fault as a city for never planning drainage. Climate change is real. That's why it's not our fault that everything broke and we failed to do our jobs as elected leaders. And that's not limited to any one group of people. I find that climate change often becomes real for people when they need an excuse. Beforehand, it's not real. And that's something, unfortunately, I see in a lot of the agricultural sector is it's not real until they need an excuse. And, again, like as somebody who's an agricultural insider, it's a little bit of a tough love relationship, because my job has been for a long time. It's really easy for anybody with a business to kind of go off of, your preconceived notions, right? This is how I think the world works. But if you're a business owner, your job is not to play out how you think the world works. It's to pay attention how the world actually works, right?
So my
works. Yeah, like reality is going to come clobber you if you can't face it beforehand, right? So my job has, for a long time, has been, walking my clients through, yes, this is really happening. Climate change doesn't care how you feel about it. It's that old conservative talking point, the facts don't care about your feelings. And I got to remind people that cuts both ways, right?
That's right.
And I find the most important thing when having those conversations is I think there's a lot of reasons people are in denial about it, but one of them is deep down they think they can't do anything about it anyway, so what's the point of facing it head on? If it's coming at you anyway and you can't dodge, then what's the point of thinking about it? So one of the most important things I find to do is talk about here's what we can do. Here's what we can do. It is a real problem, and that means it has real solutions, right? It's a real problem and there are real solutions. So one of the problems that farmers are facing right now in North Carolina is drainage. It's flooding, right? Typically, they'll blame it on development because there's also that going on at the same time. But I'm like, they also know that the 1,000-year flood events are now more like 1-year flood events, right? There's some recognition that that's happening. They won't say climate change, but they know that the flooding is becoming more frequent, right? And so you don't necessarily have to say climate change, but you can say, look, flooding is happening. We got to come up with some ordinances on flood control. They may not emotionally be willing to connect it to climate change in the moment, but you can say, well, we do need, we need funding for flood control. If you put it that way, then they tend to go along with it. I would say, like, to be honest with you, like, if you're trying to organize around climate change and you're trying to get farmers on board, honestly, I think your efforts are just better spent somewhere else. I think your efforts are better spent saying, here's a particular symptom of climate change. Here's how we're going to address it. Here's how green energy can help you as a farmer, right? There's a time and place to get converts, but there's also a time and place to like work with where people are already at. And so when I'm working with farmers, I usually don't try to proselytize climate change is real. I kind of go, here's the side effect that is happening. And we know that one of the most important things we have to do for climate change is renewable energy. And find the economic argument for farmers about why renewable energy works for them. Because the one thing I've found in North Carolina politics and in general is if you bring up climate change, people just want to argue. If you bring up money, I've yet to meet someone say, oh, hold on, I don't agree that we should make more money. Right? So this is a conversation I've had with some folks, because what they really want me to do is thump the Bible and preach about how climate change is real to farmers. And I'm like, you think nobody's tried that? You cannot get folks to really focus on something that they want to focus on. You can't drag a horse to water, etc. What you can do is find out this is speaking as a politician, right? Speaking as a coalition builder, right? What you can do is you can find out what people are willing to be interested in. And you can say, that's how this problem connects to this problem. And here's how we can bring them together. That is really your job as a leader, I think, more than, gaining converts, is to identify what people are already worried about and connect it to other bigger problems. That is your job as a coalition builder.
That's right.
And so that's kind of what I tell people, is focus on that. Like, just be a decent coalition builder. Like, build coalitions about what you need. Find ways that what you want is going to help other people. And that's how you pull them in. Preaching, lecturing, that's not going to get you anywhere. Just find other ways to deal with people. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. That's
Leadership 101 by Dr. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tyson. I said, no, it's a fantastic point. I mean, Williams was going to be better, so you'll go with yours. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say Leadership 101 by Dr. Tabor. I mean, that was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the...
I want to be clear. # not all farmers. Like, yeah, there's a lot of farmers who know what climate change is and are worried about it, but that's not the political center of gravity in the farm sector. So just to be clear, like, yeah.
No, that's super helpful. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
You talked about, you mentioned on-ramps to farming. What are some of those that are part of your thought process, will be part of your administration?
So glad you asked. All right. So there's so many ways into agriculture that are not being born into land, right? Because even if being born into land worked, right, it's still a little bit exclusive, right? That's not going to happen to most people. So there are many, many on-ramps into farming. To keep it brief, there's one really cool one that I'd love to tell people about, because as soon as you tell people about this, it's like a light goes on in their eyes and they're like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. So this is a model that I've seen done primarily in California. And I will add, I would never tell anybody just copy California's homework directly, right?
I like how you said that.
Yeah, even if everything in another place works perfectly, you still have to like translate a little bit for your own environment, your own like economic situation, right? So never copy and paste someone's homework directly, but like learn from what works for people. And this is a thing that I've seen out there that works really well. I think California gets a bad rap for some reasons. Not all of them undeserved. They got their water issues. They get a bad rap for bad labor conditions. Ironically, it's because the farm workers in California are the most able to speak out on what's happening to them. So like it's the place we hear the most about from because they have the most rights. That's what you should be worried about. Anyway, so that is to say, I think California kind of got a rap as the bad place in agriculture, but I'm like, listen, we're in the South. It can get worse,
Oh, yes.
Right. So a thing that does work really well out there. So California is one of the few places in the United States where there's upward mobility in agriculture. You don't have to be born onto a farm to become a farmer. That's weird. And it's part of why California's farm economy is so like high performing, and effective. There's a lot of other reasons, but that's a big one. They have a career path into farming. It's crazy. And it's wild. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. One that we kind of have out here is you can rent land and become a farmer. That's kind of standard all over the US. It's not necessarily the best pathway. It can often just be kind of a lifelong trap into debt, right? Depending on how it works. But that has traditionally been sold as a pathway into becoming a farmer in the US. Whether or not it works is a different question. But another pathway that seems to be very effective is a thing that they call out there an LMC, or a land management company. Right. So what that is basically a bunch of farm workers get together and they say, hey, we know how to run a place. We know how to run a farm. We don't have one. Well, hire us and we'll run your farm. Right. So imagine if you hire a landscaping company to take care of your yard. It's the same thing, but for a farm. It's really that simple. Right. And wow. Yeah, so you can get a bunch of farm workers together. They have enough to like maybe buy some tools, but not some land. And so Instead of paying someone else to farm their land, the landowner pays you. It's a real job. And the reason this works in California is because they grow things that make a lot of money per acre. It sounds too dumb to be true, but if you make more money, you can afford to pay people. It's crazy. You have to say that in a California accent. It's crazy. You can pay people.
I love
I want to be
this.
clear. The farmers in California don't talk like that, but it's fun to imagine that they do.
Absolutely.
So what you'll get is in California, you have a lot of young farmers, just in the normal course of business. There was this one time I was doing a work trip out there, and we had to meet up with this one farmer one day. And your classic good old boy is in plaid. I wear plaid so people know I'm in agriculture. If you don't wear plaid, they're like, I don't know about this. But this guy's in. You got to wear the costume or they don't know. So this guy is not in the costume. He's in athleisure because that's what you can move in, right? He's out there to do work, right? And we jump into the truck and the music starts playing and it's Tupac. And I was just like, yes. So that's a thing that can happen when you have functional career pathways, right? So if you have, and the cool thing about LMCs is they could be employee owned. It can just be a bunch of farm workers getting together, young people getting together. We have a little bit of money. We can buy a truck and some tools and manage some land. Now, it's tough to start one of those companies, right? You got to have some people who know things and have enough to get started. You have to have some clients who trust you enough to trust you with their land. So getting started is tough. I'm not going to lie to you. But once you have one of those in place, you can hire new people. You can train totally new people into agriculture. You don't have to grow up on a farm. You can just get internships and jobs and learn it. And you can, work and, pay your dues to some extent and get a partnership, in that company, just like lawyers do in a law firm or dentists do in a dental practice. It's a profession. It's a job where you can have some ownership. You may not own the land, but you own the tools. You own, you have those relationships with clients, just like any other professional contractor relationship. And if you do a good job and you're growing crops that make good money, then your landowner pays you a fixed salary. So you're making predictable income. You can hopefully save some money and get some land of your own someday. Or you and your coworkers and your partners can all pool your money and acquire some land together and manage that together, perhaps as an employee owned kind of situation, which is, it sounds hippy dippy, but there's actually a lot of engineering and contracting companies that are employee owned because employee ownership works really well, functionally for businesses that depend on really tight logistics where everybody has to be empowered to make decisions in the moment, right? So I think it's actually just a really good fit for agriculture. So I want to be clear, those operations are tough to start. You have to already have some experience to start one. You have to have some tools. It's like any other business, starting them is tough. But once you have companies like that, new people can join in. They can earn money. They can potentially build equity in that company, acquire land, and actually get on that cycle of becoming a farmer as opposed to well, you either got born in or you didn't. There's an LMC that I ran into that, just a quick example. It's the first ring of farmland outside of Los Angeles, right? And so there was some lady in Hollywood who had, she's in the film industry somewhere, and she had a little orange ranch, right? And she owned this orange ranch because she wanted to be there for 3 weeks in the spring, kind of in the winter when the orange trees were blooming, because they smell incredible. And that's all she wanted out of this property. She said, you know what, you guys keep the oranges. I just need you to manage this the rest of the year so I can be here for 3 weeks in the spring in my fancy vacation property. You guys actually keep the oranges. And they were like, you got it, boss. And so they got paid for this. They managed the sales and everything. So she got her vacation home. The land was kept as functional farmland and people got jobs. Everybody wins.
Everybody wins.
Yeah. So these are the potentials. And when I say on-ramps, this is what it can look like. And it's really exciting.
Who will think about the corporations and their bottom line?
Yeah. So that's the thing is the wild thing about California is I think LMCs are managing quite a bit of land in certain places and people look at it and they say, it's a corporate farm. It's not a family farm. And I'm like, yeah, it's better, maybe.
Yeah.
Some of them are your classic shareholder owned corporations, but some of them are companies just owned by the farmers. And that's a different model. I think folks don't always know what to make of it, but it can kind of work out for everybody. So
I did some economic development work and I was always admired the employee ownership model. I think that the faceless shareholder and corporate model is brutal,
Mm-hmm.
at best. And giving folk at Target or at Burger King or Sam's an opportunity to see the fruit of their own labor uh, generate wealth for them and stability. Wow, I mean
Mm-hmm.
that's a beautiful thing, and I really appreciate you sharing that because I think that is at the core. You're really thinking. You're really forward thinking, and I also appreciate your honesty around where we are. I think you have to look. Uh, we all have to look ourselves in the mirror and recognize that we can be better, no matter how good you are, and strive to be that better person, that better state, and that better agricultural economy. And I appreciate you saying that, man.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
always afraid of coming off a little bit harsh on the farm sector. I yell because I care. It's when you work in agriculture and it's your job to help people be successful, you know that it's possible. You know that we can do better. And I look here at North Carolina. Our land is rich. Like okay, our soil's a little sandy, right? But we have a great long growing season. We have plenty of water and rain. We have mountains, so we can grow things that like cool weather in the summer. That's a weird thing to be able to do. We have these dense urban markets that are thirsty for good food all the time. Just a day's drive away, there is no reason our countryside should be poor. And so when it's your job to help people be successful and you see all the things that are standing between us and success, and it's hard not to get a little like about it, because you know how good things could be and you just want to get there already. And some of the things I kind of tell people, like, I think we might be loving agriculture to death because we're so attached to a certain idea of the way it's supposed to work that we don't see what we could have and we don't see how this thing we love is hurting us actually a little bit. And yeah, like when you see how much better things could be and how much is waiting for us if we just like pay a little attention, we're successful when we help other people be successful, workers, customers. Um, you just got to like put yourself in other people's shoes a little bit and you can go a long way. So, um, and if that means you have to point out that some of the things we're already doing are maybe not perfect, that's okay. We're going to get through it. It's all right.
are we in love with the nostalgic sense of what agriculture used to be, and that model just doesn't work for where we are today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really interesting that we have this nostalgic idea that everything used to be family farms. Because again, guys, we're in the South. I think we ought to know. We ought to know
We
a
know
little bit
better,
better, right?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and it's wild too because when I tell folks, I lived in the Midwest, right? You tell folks in the Midwest, it didn't all used to be great, and they're like, "Oh yeah, because you're in the South, don't you know? It's so bad down there." And I'll say, "No, no, no. In 1920, 40% of the family farmers in Iowa were actually sharecroppers and tenants. Did you know that?"
Wow.
Yeah. It wasn't exactly the same as it was done in the South, but it wasn't a great situation to be in, right?
Wasn't great. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have kind of this golden age imagery of how the past used to work. And that's actually not an accurate reflection of how agriculture was. And I think that can kind of give us a really distorted view of what our options are. That can make us think if we can only turn back the clock, then we'll be fine. And I'm like, well, no, the past is what got us to the present, right? Number one, it wasn't good. And number two, that was our road that got us here. So maybe if we want to fix things, we got to step back and look at like what actually works, learn from other places, not just other times. And you can't nostalgia your way to solutions that the past caused.
Ooh, Jesus. That
To problems the
that
past
is
caused? Was that English?
truth on so many points. I mean, yeah, we're there's a candidate for governor who wants to turn the clock back. Literally, his words are, "I want to go back to the days when," and I won't,
Was it when
complete the
women couldn't
quote.
vote so I can give them the vote again? Was that it? I was like, oh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like just super weird place to go to, and yeah, it's just
Like, that's
really
so
odd.
sweet, bro.
Thanks, I think, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
All right.
no.
Yeah.
Still plenty
It's
Yes.
of
like,
still plenty
correction,
Anyway,
of
white
fodder.
women.
Well,
Correction, white
still
women were given that vote at that time. Whole different
still plenty
situation
of
for
right.
everybody else.
still plenty of fodder in the old Mike Robinson file, I'm sure. Fine. If
Oh,
he got one, then you kind of have to. Well, it was just weird. Plenty of
yeah.
Mike Rob. Plenty of
Whoever was in charge of Oppo on that, like the discipline it must have taken to sit on that one and whatever else they've got, hats off to whoever's doing that.
I mean, I literally just saw a Twitter post where the Michelle Morrow said that she wanted to execute Biden and
Obama.
Obama, yeah.
It's normal and natural to be frustrated with your political opponents. Let's use our words. It's okay to have big feelings.
I mean, I was going to ask you about the hyperpartisanship, but let's just skip over it.
Because there's actually
for sure. Yeah. Right.
I would never be able to talk to them all into this short a campaign, right? That's a lot of people.
Right.
But like, again, I've worked in ag 26 years. I know how to talk to Republicans. It's like my job, and there's quite a bit of common ground. Primarily, we would like to make money, please and thank you, right? That's that really kind of brings everybody together. And if you can focus on that, it goes well. So when I call up, kind of a classic mainstream, conventional farmer, at first it's like, Democrat. But then we talk shop and it's fine. I think in a lot of ways, they just want to know that the person they're talking to gets what's going on.
That's right.
And that can be hard to find, and you got to let them stew a little bit, just let them understand that I've worked in agriculture 26 years. I have always been there to make sure that family farms are making more money, because I understand that if we care about workers' rights, if we want people to get paid more, well, where does that money come from? You got to be making money. If we want to protect the environment, clean up that water, where's that going to come from? You got to be making money. And nobody has a problem with that.
So. No. I think this job title, if there's any way to sort of summarize it, is economic development, and in a way, and so I think you have the right approach, and certainly the innovative thoughts, to really revolutionize this. This is exciting, so exciting. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you over these past couple of minutes. Tyson, do you have any more questions?
I mean, about 1 million, but I think we've already taken enough of your time. I want to echo what William said. Absolute tour de force. Sometimes you speak to someone who is just so clearly knowledgeable in their field, and it's just so refreshing. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I truly do believe you're going to win this November, and I think our state's going to be better because of it. And it's amazing that such a great person is doing it.
Tyson, that's so sweet. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back on so we can get those other questions Tyson has for you. So I appreciate it. Well, you all, thank you for yet again. Did you have any last words, Dr. Tabor, before I wrap things up? Yeah.
It's really sure. Thank you for asking. There's a website, taberfornc.com. That's TABERFORNC.com. I've been leaving them a million voicemails with that URL lately. And let's see, I'm on Twitter. It's at Sarah Tabor _BWW. Because I had my consulting company is called Bodo Waterworks, so I just had the little initials in there. I'm also on Blue Sky Mastodon. I'm trying to get on TikTok. Transitioning to video after what feels like a lifetime on Twitter is a push, so we're getting through it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Of
course, thank you.
Well,
guys.
we will get you back on here before November. We will get to the push, so again, thank you again, and to all you listeners, please reach out to Dr. Tabor. She'll be out knocking doors, making phone calls, and sharing that vision with us all here throughout the state. Tune in next time, and we will catch you later. Take care.
Thank you, guys.